first movie of Phase 4, the 24th movie in the MCU, has finally arrived with Black Widow, which just released both in theaters and on Disney Plus Premier Access, and I finally got the chance to check out this movie, and you may be actually a little surprised to see that my review's up already, because I did a post the other day saying that I wasn't going to be able to see it till Sunday, but you're seeing the video on Sunday, so basically plans changed, things happened, and I got to see the film a whole day earlier, which was super exciting. But guys, today we are talking about Black Widow in depth, breaking down all the biggest reveals in this film and how it sets up the future of the MCU. So guys, of course, if you have not seen this movie yet, I got to give you a big ol' spoiler warning here, because again, we are talking about everything that went down in this film. But actually, before we get into that, I do want to just give my quick thoughts on what I actually thought of the film as a whole in general and how it scales with the rest of the MCU, because there's a lot of conflicting reviews. Leading up to this movie, I watched a lot of reviews on YouTube and read some of the social media stuff, and there was definitely some mixed stuff. A lot more negative stuff than I was expecting. So going into this, I was expecting not everything to work out as exactly as I would hoped it would, and yeah, that's exactly what happened. This is a movie that I would honestly put on the level of maybe like Ant-Man and the Wasp, where it's like, it's a good movie and I really enjoyed it and had a lot of fun with it and everything, but when you compare it to other MCU movies, like literally any of the Avengers movies, or even like the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, or Black Panther, or Thor Ragnarok, basically all of the recent MCU movies, it doesn't stand a chance against any of those. But that's okay. It kind of reminds me of every time I talk about Thor the Dark World. Of course, everybody says this is the worst MCU movie, and yeah, it probably is, but that's the thing though, just because it's the worst MCU movie doesn't mean it's a bad movie. I honestly like Thor the Dark World. I think it's a good movie, but it's just when you compare it to all these other MCU movies, it just doesn't stand a chance because everything else is so good. And that's, again, kind of the way I see this Black Widow movie. It's a good movie, and I like it, but it's not, it doesn't stand up against all these other MCU films. And I personally feel it doesn't really do a good job of fulfilling all these different things that it was originally meant to do. Like, of course, the biggest thing is that this is supposed to be the swan song of Natasha Romanoff. This is the last film we're going to be seeing Scarlet Johansson as Black Widow. So this is supposed to be like her big send-off movie, and I feel like it didn't really do a good enough job of finishing off that character. Like, by the end of the film, I really didn't feel any closure for the character. It just didn't do that for me. And even though this is Natasha's movie, it did really kind of spend more time focusing on the other characters, which honestly I don't mind, because I love some of these characters in this movie, and some of the newer characters. But again, it still should have focused more on Natasha Romanoff because it is her movie. And also just the fact that this is a prequel, that's already kind of, given this a disadvantage, because it does a lot to set up the future of the MCU. It definitely does, with a whole bunch of these new characters that are introduced here, but also it is a prequel. So there were things in here that were rushed, especially towards the end, where it was like all of a sudden, like, all right, General Ross shows up, and then all of a sudden, boom, now Natasha's blonde and she's going off and everything. And it just, some of the things in this film just felt like they had to fall so specifically into place. And I mean, I get it, they had to fit in with the MCU timeline, but some things just didn't quite line up here with this movie, especially when it comes to the pacing. That's another thing. I felt like this movie went by really fast, and there were some really confusing parts where it was like, okay, that's happening, and then that just happened. So, as you can tell, I definitely have mixed feelings about this movie. I liked it, I enjoyed it, I had a good time with this movie, but it's definitely not the golden standard when it comes to the MCU, and hopefully these next couple MCU films will be better. They look pretty darn good with Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. Eternals looks pretty great. Spider-Man No Way Home, oh my, yeah. So, Black Widow, good movie, not good enough, but also good enough, if you know what I mean. But one of the things I did really enjoy about this movie was what we got to learn more about the Red Room and Natasha's experience with the Black Widow program, which honestly we didn't really get much of. That is one thing. Another thing I wish we would have gotten more of is more of a development on what went on in the Red Room. But I did like the flashbacks to when they were kids and that whole thing of like this undercover family and all that. And also the opening credits were really cool, showing kind of like a montage of what they went through and all that terror and pain, which really makes me feel like this movie is honestly one of the darkest, more edgier films of the MCU, which I really like, but they still could have really gone farther, because there's a couple things here that they really like kind of started to tease, but then all of a sudden like weren't ready to go all in on it, which I wish they could have just really committed to it. But yeah, but anyway, definitely my favorite characters of this film, top two favorite characters, Yelena Belova and Red Guardian. Yelena was awesome. Going into this, literally everybody who's done a review on this movie has said Yelena is such a great character and you're going to love her, and I did. Florence Pugh did such an amazing job here, and we know she's going to have a huge future in the MCU, so I'm definitely excited to see more of her, and I really enjoyed her in this movie. She was such a badass but still funny character, and she really was the younger sister of this family, and that, well, that's obviously how it was supposed to play out, but she really was kind of like a child. Like, she was very childish, but like in a cool way, and I really enjoyed seeing that. And then same goes for Red Guardian. He was a really, really funny character. I really enjoyed him. Plus, his suit was great, even though he's older now and he's overweight, still fits. He's still Red Guardian, and he was still really cool here. And, you know, it would have been nice if he actually got a win in this movie, but I did like the tragic backstory of like how he had to pretend with this whole family because of his deal with Dreykov, and how he ended up in prison, and how he actually really did love his daughters even though they weren't technically his daughters. So I did really enjoy seeing all of that, and I really, really do hope that we do get to see Red Guardian again at some point in the future, because he is alive, he's out there, so who knows what he's up to nowadays. But let's go ahead and talk about one of the biggest reveals of this film with Budapest. This is a thing that was teased all the way back in, I think, the first Avengers movie, where Clint and Natasha referenced something about Budapest, and now all these years later, everybody's been wondering like what went down in Budapest. And we did get the explanation of how Clint and Natasha teamed up to take down Dreykov, and that is where Natasha actually ended up being responsible for the death of Dreykov's daughter, which also ties back to the first Avengers movie where Loki referenced Dreykov's daughter. So that was really cool that we followed up on that. And I do like that we finally get to see what Budapest was, but I wish we actually saw it, because a lot of it was literally just Natasha telling us about it, and we did get to see that quick flashback where we did hear Clint's voice, so we got that Jeremy Renner cameo, but it would have been nice if we actually saw him on screen and saw these two characters in action actually doing all this stuff here. So that's really what I would have liked to see here, but I do like that we at least followed up after these teases and actually got to tie all those little knots together and complete the story. And this big reveal with this whole Budapest thing does, of course, tie into probably the biggest reveal of this film, which is something I was not expecting, with Taskmaster's identity reveal. And we're kind of just going to talk about Taskmaster as a character here. But this was a reveal I was not expecting, because this whole time we were thinking it was that Rick Mason guy that was played by O.T. Fagenbill, or whatever his name is, who, by the way, was barely even in the movie, which, I mean, you gotta hand it to Marvel. That was a huge red herring that we all thought it was that guy, and then he was barely in the movie, and it was not at all him. But it was actually revealed that Taskmaster truly was Dreykov's daughter, and now this suit is keeping her alive, and her face is scarred and all this stuff, and that was the big reveal. And I have to say, they got me. I did not see it coming. I was kind of partially spoiled on this the other day, because I did see an image accidentally. Somebody put in their YouTube thumbnail, and it popped up on my homepage when I just walked into YouTube. And yeah, so I saw a picture of Taskmaster with the helmet off, but I saw the face and I was like, I have literally no idea who that was. So at the same time, even though I saw what Taskmaster looked like, I didn't actually know who it was. And it fits with the story. This fits so well with the story. I can't say I'm really a big fan of it, especially because I'm a huge fan of Taskmaster from the comics with Tony Masters. So I really wish they could have actually done that version of the character. And Taskmaster really is the big disappointment of this film. Because again, he is such a cool villain in the comics. He's actually one of my favorite Marvel villains in Marvel Comics. But in this film, he wasn't really, or she wasn't really even a villain. She was actually basically a henchman. This whole time, it was like in all the trailers and stuff, we were shown that Taskmaster was supposedly the main villain of this Black Widow movie. But really, it was just Dreykov that was controlling her, which is sucky, especially because, you know, it was cool. We did get a couple cool fight scenes where we saw Taskmaster imitating some different Avengers. We saw him imitating Black Widow, obviously, Spider-Man, Black Panther, Captain America, all that great stuff. But the problem is that is the main power of Taskmaster in the comics, and I really wanted to see some cool fight scenes with that. And again, we did get that stuff, but barely. And pretty much everything we did see with those imitations was in the trailer. And on top of that, we never even got an explanation of how it worked. We do know, based off what it looked like on the heads-up display in the helmet, that it is very similar and most likely connected to the Stark technology that Tony Stark used in Captain America Civil War to replicate fight patterns with Captain America. So there's that, but they never actually explained that in this movie, which I definitely really would have liked to have seen. But I suppose they did have a lot of other stuff that they had to focus more on in this movie. So yeah, overall, when it comes to Taskmaster, was definitely the biggest disappointment of this film. Not necessarily with the identity reveal. I don't have a problem with it being Dreykov's daughter. Obviously, I would have preferred it to be just Tony Masters and like actual Taskmaster from the comics. But I mean, it was still a cool character when she was doing her fight scenes and everything. So I'd love to see the character return, possibly for Thunderbolts or something like that, or Dark Avengers, whatever they're gonna do. That'd be pretty cool. A nice option, a nice route to go down with this character. But actually, speaking of Taskmaster, not actually being the main villain of this film, let's talk about the final battle, because always the final battle is always one of the best parts of all these MCU movies. But there wasn't really a final battle in this movie, because I guess the final battle was Black Widow and Taskmaster fighting in the sky when they were falling from the Red Room, which was cool. But again, we saw most of it in the trailer. It wasn't really much of a fight, and then it's like as soon as they hit the ground, it was just done. So that's another thing that was kind of a little disappointing, that I think definitely could have been done way better in this film. But one of the best parts of this movie was actually not part of the movie. It was the post-credit scene, the end credit scene. Of course, a classic when it comes to the MCU. This is something that again was something I was spoiled about. I've heard about it before, but it was such a great scene, and I'll probably do another video breaking it down more in depth. But of course, we get the reveal that Yelena, she's mourning the death of Natasha, and she's at like her gravestone and all that stuff. So that's pretty cool. But then all of a sudden, Val shows up. Of course, Val, the character we saw introduced in The Falcon and Winter Soldier, but of course she was originally supposed to be introduced in Black Widow in this post-credit scene. So we got a little switcheroony here. And but I don't think it really affected things too much, although it did seem kind of short for like what was supposed to be her introduction here. But we get Val recruiting Yelena, even though it actually seems like they've been working together for a while now, to go hunt down the man who is responsible for Natasha's death, Jeremy Renner's Clint Barton Hawkeye, which is so awesome, because again, we know that Yelena is going to be in the Hawkeye Disney Plus series. We've known that for months. But now the fact that she's actually going to be a villain in this series, possibly the main villain, I don't know if she'll be the main villain, but she'll be one of the villains, and she's going to be going after Clint Barton. That is so cool, and it makes so much sense, and it gets me so excited. Especially because, as I was talking about earlier before, this ties into the Thunderbolts, because we saw Val, her final scene in The Falcon Winter Soldier was her recruiting John Walker as the US agent to some sort of new villain team. So this is something we're going to be seeing with this character in the future of the MCU in these next couple projects, is Val just recruiting different villains to become a member of the Thunderbolts or Dark Avengers, depending what they actually end up calling it. I've heard that it's going to be like a combination of the two teams, but I'm interested to see which name they actually go with. And this is something I'm super excited for because I love villains. That's one of the things I love the most about superhero movies, is just the villains, which is one of the big reasons I'm disappointed with this Black Widow movie, is because they did so poorly with Taskmaster. But a whole villain team sounds insane. And again, we already got US Agent. Now we got Yelena Belova. Hopefully Taskmaster, maybe not. I'd love to see Ghost from Ant-Man and the Wasp return. Abomination is coming back in Shang-Chi. I'd love to see him join the team. There's really so many different possibilities, and I'm super excited for this. And this really does just get me so hyped for the future of the MCU and where we are going with all these various routes in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and things are going to get insane. But yeah, guys, so this is my spoiler review for Black Widow. Of course, let me know your thoughts on this movie in the comments below. Do you feel kind of the same as I do? Do you feel kind of a little disappointed with this being the first film of Phase 4 and not really living up to the standards that we hoped it would be? But again, I still think it was a good movie. I still think I would recommend it to people that haven't seen it yet, but it's definitely not like a big, huge movie that's like super good or anything. It's really just alright, and it serves its purpose. It tells this great story, but there's definitely a lot of things they could have done way better than they actually did in this film. But overall, I did enjoy it. So anyways, guys, stay tuned for, of course, more future updates on the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We got the season finale of Loki coming up this week, and of course I'm going to be doing a video on that. I'll probably do a couple more videos on Black Widow throughout the week, breaking down some of these reveals in their own separate videos, so stay tuned for those as well. But anyways, guys, thanks so much for watching. Please drop a like if you enjoyed this video, and hit the subscribe button so I can keep you up to date on everything that goes on in the Marvel life.